Welcome to the Unstoppable Freedom Podcast. I'm Jimmy Page. And with the culture war raging all around us, it's become increasingly more difficult and more important to courageously share your values and beliefs if they don't conform to the approved narrative. It's more and more difficult, and it's more and more important. In fact, self-censorship is probably an even greater threat to our freedoms than the censorship and silencing that we're seeing every day. That's especially true in the counseling field. And our guest today is Johnny Sanders. He's a licensed professional counselor in Oklahoma and Texas, two great states, two free states still. He's the owner of a Christian counseling practice, Truth and Grace Counseling. And he's also the host of a podcast called Faithfully Engaged. And today, he's going to help shine the light on how important it is to boldly and authentically share our conservative and Christian values in the public square. Johnny, welcome to the show.
So excited to be here.
Dude, let's go. You know, we've had some good conversation leading up to this podcast. And so I'm excited because a lot of our listening audience is increasingly discouraged by the way people are being censored, discouraged with the way our values are being treated when we publicly share them. They're seeing people lose their jobs. They're seeing people get silenced. They're seeing people get censored. I mean, it's a disaster. Interestingly enough, and I have a specific question on this, but interestingly enough, the legal team that we're affiliated with, we've got a number of relationships with Alliance Defending Freedom, First Liberty Institute, and others. They will say to you, legally, we've never had more religious freedom than right now. I mean, from a legal perspective, we're winning, and we're winning all the time at the highest courts. However, because there's active censorship from our government, there's active censorship all around us, politically, corporately, in your own job, you could be being censored and silenced. Because of that, there's this chilling effect, right? So for you in the counseling business, why is it so difficult to be openly conservative in your field of work?
Great question. And some of this is a pure numbers game. It's kind of hard to get an exact number, but best estimates, it's around 90% of the those in the psychological profession are considered either liberal or something along that line, while only 10% would consider themselves conservative. So easy to see.
But why is that? Like, that is, first of all, I think that's very similar to the educational field, interestingly. Why is that? Why does it attract people that are maybe more on the liberal side of things?
You know, I don't think there's one set answer on that. Some of that you could see just college educated people tend to be more liberal if you just look at some of the numbers. So that's some of it. But I think specifically for psychology, it's really centered on emotions, on feelings, things of that nature, which granted, I stand by your emotions are important, but you can see where you're so focused on that, you can get into more of the liberal side of let's make everybody happy. Everything's great. It's not your problem. It's everybody else's problem. I think it just attracts a certain type of person into the field.
I see. And then I think also probably something has to do with the training, with the way that you're trained to deal with problems and counsel people. I would imagine there's some of that there too. Are there, so as you said, there's only about 10% of counselors are conservative. Is that universe smaller with respect to conservative Christian counselors?
I would imagine so, that you just kind of narrow that gap a little bit further. I don't have any specific numbers on that, but we can see that just in the conservative movement in general.
Yeah.
A good chunk are Christian, but not all are. So yeah, that would be a even further narrowing from there.
And, you know, the fact that you're unashamed and bold about this is truly remarkable. Why is it important that you in the counseling field and that all of us are open with our values? Why is it important to you? And was there a turning point where you said, hey, wait a minute, I am not going to continue to veil my values. I'm going to lead with my values, and I'm going to be who I am regardless of what environment I'm in. Why is that important?
I'll start with the why it's important, and I do have a personal story. Why it's important is because there are a lot of people out there. You don't have to really look anywhere. Just look in your own neighborhood. People are suffering.
Yeah.
There's a ton of mental health struggles going on, and as mentioned, the counseling field is extremely left leaning. The bigger bodies, American Counseling Association, American Psychological Association, very very liberal. And what happens is you get enough of that stuff out there, the conservative side, roughly half the country, tunes out. I don't want to be brainwashed by these people. I'm just not going to get help.
Yeah.
And that's a problem.
Mm.
That conservatives need help too. And what I've seen since opening up is I've gotten people from states I'm not licensed in, Pennsylvania, Minnesota. I just had someone from Canada reach out to me that they're like, I need help and I don't know who to talk to.
Wow.
And me being open with my values is actually getting people help. And I can at least point them to somebody else that maybe can help them. And otherwise, they wouldn't get help at all. So that's really important to me.
It's amazing.
A turning point for me for being more open is I previously was working in a hospital environment during COVID. And as mentioned, I'm in Oklahoma. I'm in a pretty red spot of Oklahoma. So I'm red as red could get, really. And even there, I still had to choose between keeping my job or getting the vaccine shot. And
Wow.
again, my thought there is if this is happening to me here, I mean, my goodness, there's nowhere that this couldn't happen.
Yeah.
And I ultimately chose not to, and kind of with the telehealth side of things, and now started my own practice and everything. And that was a turning point of I can't wait around and just hope things get better. I need to be active. I can't just put my family and everything in this spot of hoping other people around me change. I need to be the one that steps out and gets a little bit more faithful and does the changing myself.
That's amazing. I think that the boldness of what you're saying, something you just said was, everyone needs help, right? Conservatives, liberals, it doesn't matter what your political stripe is. We all need mental care and emotional care. But if you don't think that the person that you're going to for counseling shares your values or shares your perspective, that could be a barrier. So I think you're right. People ask me all the time, do you know a good Christian marriage counselor, for example? And I'm like, man, I don't know. I don't know who I would recommend. And that is a barrier for people because people who are men and women of faith generally want a faith-based solution to their issues, whether it's marriage, whether it's mental issues they're experiencing or emotional or grief. I think it's important that people see that people share their values when they're trying to make that determination for who to go to for counseling. So I think it's important that you're bold. What have you learned about how to do this that will encourage everyone else to be bold about their values and beliefs?
There's a lot of different ways to go about this. The first thing I would say is, like in my case, having other conservative counselors and other conservative Christian counselors around me has been massive. We actually have a little underground Facebook group. You can't even search it. We protect it a lot. And it's just kind of our own little safe haven there. Liberals might call it a safe space, that type of thing for us, that we just have community, that we're not alone. So that's the first thing I would say. I mean, most of you listening aren't counselors, but go find some other like-minded people at your job, maybe family members, somebody that can be in the battle with you. And the thing about it is, in order to find that community, you have to say something. And that's the scary part. But that's the good part is once I kind of threw some things out there onto social media, hey, I'm not doing this gender affirming stuff. Guess what? Other people find you, and other people that were previously silent, they start speaking up.
Yeah.
That's not only counseling, that is anywhere. If you say something, yeah, people are going to dislike you, but you're going to find people in your camp too. So you have to
Yeah.
have community people around you to help you along the way.
Man, I absolutely love that. And I ascribe to the belief that courage is courageous. I'm sorry, that courage is contagious.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that when you courageously share what you believe in, what you stand for, that other people are emboldened to do the same, right? Because the truth is, if you feel like you're the only one that's taking a stand, you are pretty darn vulnerable in that position. And it's unlikely that other people are going to be part of that. So once you start sharing, like you said, it attracts people that believe the same things.
Yes. And it really is quite that simple. I talk
Yeah.
often in my counseling practice with my clients. Most of the things we talk about aren't that complicated. They're really not.
Right.
They can be hard. They can be difficult to put into practice, but it is quite that simple. Share what you care about and see what happens.
Wow. I love that. Tell me why is it important for Christians who need counseling to engage with a Christian counselor? You know, sometimes people feel like that may or may not matter, but are there risks associated with engaging with someone who doesn't have a biblical worldview? Why is it important that they share the same values?
Wonderful, wonderful question. And here's the thing. Most counselors are trained in this misguided belief that the counselor is a blank slate. So you come to me as a client, I'm this blank slate, and I'm just there to support you and kind of point you in the right direction. But I'm neutral. Now, we can pretty quickly see some of the flaws there. I think that's a big chunk of why we kind of got in the mess of our culture as a whole. There is no such thing as neutrality. You stand for something, no matter if you say it or not.
Yeah.
And it's very naive to think that me as a counselor that I'm completely neutral. I'm not.
Yeah.
I state that very openly in my private practice that, hey, you don't have to be a Christian or a conservative to see me, but
Right.
I line out like my statement of faith, kind of this is the perspective I'm coming from. If you like that, great. If you don't, that's fine too. I'll find you help elsewhere. But what happens is you may go to a counselor that is either liberal or maybe even conservative, and they may try to say, yeah, I'm neutral, I'm just here to help you, but there's subtle little ways that could send you the wrong way. I'll give you another example here. There's something called mindfulness that is kind of a big kind of counseling push. And there's some good in it, that it's about kind of slowing down and making sure that your mind is clear and everything. But where they kind of teach you is almost more of a empty your mind and just almost kind of like an Eastern Buddhist type of mindset. Whereas Christianity, it teaches that when you meditate on the word. You can't empty your mind. It's what are you going to fill it with? Are you going to fill it with Christ or with the world?
Yeah.
And that's just one
This
example.
is so good. This is so good. I mean, that's like bullseye stuff, right? Because you're right. And the person who claimed to be neutral, they're not neutral at all. If they're introducing mindfulness, which is, in Buddhism and other religions, that's not neutral. And nor should the Christian be neutral. The Christian should bring the power of God to that relationship as well. I just love that. I love that.
Yeah. Yes, and that's where you just need to be careful what you're signing up for.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's important to have those conversations with a client. Like, so I'm sure from your side of the aisle, hey, listen, this is my come from, and I'm going to use the word of God. Is that, are you okay with that? I'm sure you're getting permissions or whatever you need to, but I think people are coming to you partly because of your worldview. And I think you should feel the freedom to have integrity in your practice, to be who you're made to be. That's just being integrous. You're bringing the truth through your lens, through that biblical lens. So, I love it. And I think no matter what role you're in, whether you're a business leader or owner, whether you're someone who's working on the front lines in customer service, whatever your role is, you should be integrous. In other words, you don't check your faith at the door. You bring your faith with you. That's part of who you are, part of your identity.
100%. Yeah. And that's the thing that I try to instill with some of my clients, that, yeah, I'm doing this as a counselor, but there's nothing stopping you from doing that as a construction worker or whatever you may be.
Right. Well, you started by talking about how, following COVID, mental health has just imploded. I mean, it really has. I was on a conversation this morning with a handful of guys, and we were talking about how people are they're worn out, they're tired, they're having more difficulties than ever, and we've seen an incredible rise in drug use, absolutely astronomical. A lot of causes for that. Incredible rise in alcohol abuse, anxiety, depression, medication, even suicide. And it's been particularly hard on kids, I think. Let's talk a little bit about that. Let's talk about what they're facing and how your approach to things can be more effective.
This is actually a really personal question. Just to tell a little bit about myself. So I'm married, have 3 kids, and tell you the years that my kids were born. My firstborn was born in 2019, second 2021, wow. And we just had our third earlier this year. So wow. This age is my children's age. And the fact of the matter is, the one that was born in 19, she just turned 4. That's her entire life. Like, her entire existence is wrapped up in COVID. And we know beyond a shadow of a doubt that those years that she's existed are massive. You don't get those 4 years back. They are there, and we could theoretically change everything for the rest of her life. And those 4 years are probably just that much more important, because the early childhood development, we've known this forever, is everything. Wow. So one key example with my daughter, when we're given or going to the doctor or whatever, when she was a few months old, of course you have to wear the mask and all that stuff. She's at this time, I don't know, 6-7 months old or something, and she instinctively takes my mask off so she can see my face. Basic stuff. She knows what daddy's face looks like. She has to see my facial reactions and stuff. It's not natural. It's not natural at all.
Yes. And I think it's funny, because during the whole COVID nonsense, I probably shouldn't refer to it that way, because a lot of people have different opinions about it. But during that process where the public health response to COVID was so heavy-handed, so egregious, lockdowns, business shutdowns, school closings, church closings, on and on it goes, mask mandates, in many ways, vaccine mandates, which have all been ruled unconstitutional. People losing just the oppression. What I discovered was it was particularly hard on kids because of exactly what you just said. We're unnaturally covering their face. They cannot, the learning disabilities, the delays that they're going to experience, from research I've seen, the lower IQs because of this. People have lost intelligence capacity because of what we did to them.
Yeah.
How do you recover from that now? Like, what do you do? You're obviously healthy. You've got a healthy marriage. You've got an intact family. You have a huge advantage, right? Because you're going to pour into these kids. What do you tell people that may not have that support system in place? How can they be an influence for people to help them, recover?
I think the first thing, and I know, like, my show and your show too is more focused on kind of that action piece. So I still agree with that. But the first thing is to recognize the severity and that there's no quick fixes. If we think that we can come in and just undo it, again, like I said, those 4 years with my daughter, you don't get those back. So there is kind of a sombering piece there of admission that things are rough. And honestly, I want people to feel that a little bit, because we can't do this again. We can't do it to our kids. We need to recognize this is a problem. So that's first. It's just that we're in a hole. Second is to not overcomplicate things and just just do the natural things with kids.
Mm.
Maybe you made your kids do the whole mask thing and
Yeah.
you lost some years of schooling or whatever. Hey, we can't go back and fix that. But what we can do is you can say, you know what? Mommy might have overreacted here. Daddy might have overreacted. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That goes a long way towards rebuilding trust. And then from there, go have fun.
Yeah.
Go play outside.
Love
If you
that.
have a neighborhood kid that you kind of have a good relationship with the parents, like go play with them. Like we don't have to overcomplicate this.
Yeah.
We're not going to fix the last few years, but go have relationships appropriately so with kids around you and show them love. That's honestly really all it is. And realize that we're not going to fix that time, but boy, we can make the future better if we invest love in our kids.
I love that. And I love the simplicity of it. And, I read a book about a year ago. It was given to me by a dear, dear friend called Holy Moments. And it's this whole idea that every single interaction with you can be a partnership with God to make someone else's day, essentially. To be in tune with what does that person need? How can I encourage them? How can I give a smile at the right time? How can I kind of bear one another's burdens, so to speak? And I love what you said, though, is get outside. Oh my gosh. I think we have an outdoor deficiency syndrome. I think we have OED, we have an outdoor deficit, and we need to get outside, experience God's creation in a different way, and have fun again. We've got to lighten the load a bit, don't you think?
At 1,000%. That's something we've seen with our kiddos, that we love to do outdoor things, and our late summer was just super, super hot. So we weren't able to go outside as much as we would like to. And did we see a behavior change? Kids need to be outside. Adults need to be outside too, mind you. Just go take a walk, go play baseball. It doesn't, like I said, it doesn't have to be complicated. And I guarantee your kids, our backyard is nothing. Like we got sticks and stuff, and they have a blast. Like you don't have to buy a lot of fancy things. Just go outside.
We would get our kids stuff for Christmas, and they wouldn't play with the thing that came in the box. They would play with the box.
Exactly.
Like, why don't we just get them empty boxes? This is amazing.
Exactly.
Well, I love that. And, I think that's a big part of the way we get out of this again, right? Is we recreate that joyful spirit. We get their face out of the screens. We take away the iPads and whatever they got in their face, which is streaming content to them, which you may or may not be excited about, by the way. Control the content a bit, make things lighter. Don't pour these heavy topics on kids. Let's talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk a little bit about censorship. We'll talk about silencing based on the approved narratives, but let's talk a bit about what kids are facing in many of their schools, which is this gender affirming care, this ideology that you can pick your gender and, well, you might have been assigned properly at birth. You might have been misassigned, all this nonsense, which is not based in science, by the way. How do we make sure that our kids are protected from ideologies that they are not equipped to handle, especially at these younger ages? What do we do?
Oh man, this is such a massive cultural problem. Obviously, the first thing I would say, kind of like with the COVID response, is recognize this is a problem, and it's one to take serious. I say again that I'm in the conservative of all conservative places, and there's a story of a local family here that they pulled a kid out of their elementary school, which was the best elementary school in town. So again, line this out: conservative of conservative, best elementary school in town, and there's a non-binary classmate that is right there. And as far as I know, the teacher wasn't really engaging in that, but still, here it is. You need to go with the mindset you will face an issue with this. Not it might happen or it probably won't happen. You will. So let that guide your decision making from the get-go. We have a wonderful book that we read to our kids called God Made Boys and Girls. Super simple. Here's a boy. Here's a girl. do a little bit of defense. Tell your kids early on what a boy and girl is. They'll read it and like, oh, duh. Like I have
Yeah.
a brother. I know what the difference is. It's super simple.
Right.
But don't wait for somebody to engage and teach your kids. You teach them. Don't assume anything. Assume like, do you see your brother? He's running around beating sticks with things. Yep, that's a lot of boys do that. You're a little girl. You love your dresses. Yep, a lot of girls love that. And also, you can even say too, hey, that little girl over there playing soccer.
Yeah,
she's still a girl. That doesn't change anything.
That's right.
Teach your kids. I'm homeschooling my kids. I'm a big fan of homeschooling. Even if you don't, and you send them to school, you still have to teach your kids not just math and science, but basic human biology, because your kids will be shown this in some way, shape, or form. There's no getting around it. I don't care how conservative an era you are. You have to teach your kids.
And I think that's a good point, because people think that if they live in a certain state, like Texas, like Oklahoma, like Florida, that their kids are not going to be exposed to this ideology. That is just not true. It tends to be a universal ideology right now in our educational system, because it's driven by the top. It's actually driven by the UN, believe it or not. There's a curriculum from the UN, which feeds its way through our educational unions and our NEA, and it gets down to essentially every school. So, and the thing about gender is interesting. Your biological gender is fixed, but your expression of who you are and how you're made can be on a spectrum. So for a girl, I have a daughter, my youngest daughter. I've got 3 boys and a daughter who's now 20. She's in college. She was tough, rough and tumble. She had 3 older brothers. She was very competitive. She's tough even to this day. She's spirited. Her life word is spirited. And so, but does that make her any less female, any much less of a young lady? No, it doesn't change anything to do with her gender. So I think we have to get away from some of the stereotypes of, if you like this, that means you are something different than you're made to be. Nothing could be further from the truth. That just simply means that that's something that you enjoy. So I love your perspective on that. And I think we have to stick to biology. It actually is a pretty simple equation to determine gender. So let me ask you this. Why, let's get back to why it's important. We know that people are being silenced. If you disagree with the prevailing narrative, which our conversation so far, we've disagreed with the prevailing narrative on essentially everything. Censorship in America is on the rise. Thank God for certain platforms that are becoming open. I think of Twitter, which used to be a great censorship platform, is now leaning into free speech. Now, I would say it's in peril because of who they've hired to run the company. That's an interesting little problem that we're facing. But there are other platforms like Rumble and others that allow free speech, the free flow of ideas, whether you agree with it or not. You remember, we've seen doctors being silenced. We've seen teachers lose their job, police officers, nurses, military members. They all lost their job because of medical decisions and religious decisions that we made. And now we know that the government is actively engaging with social media companies to censor and national media outlets to censor, silence, and control speech. We know this. This is all in a matter of court records now. The worst kind of censorship, though, is self-censorship. We started by talking about this. Out of fear of retribution, fear of how people are going to perceive you, will it affect your career, your ability to provide for your family? Talk about why this is more important now than ever before, that we boldly exercise our free speech.
Yes, great way of framing this. And here's the thing. Will you take risk by opening up with your values? Yes, that there's no way around that. That you absolutely will take a risk. However, we have to look at risk reward here. That if I don't say anything, say I keep my job and I retire and all that good stuff, you don't feel very good inside when you're shutting yourself in and just sticking by just to do it. That's not freedom.
Yeah.
We're guaranteeing I'm living a life of no freedom that way.
Yeah.
It's at least worth a shot for me to speak out and be true. I have that integrity, like you're talking about.
Yeah.
And really, what we want to do is start forming our own things. I think that's something conservatives really struggle with, is we really stick with, here's how things are. Here's the networks we go through. We have Facebook, Twitter, whatever. We just got to play by their rules. No, like we can make our own things.
Mm.
And that's something that we need to think about too. Like, yes, speaking out is great,
Yeah.
but can you go make something? Can you go make? That's why I made my own private practice, and why I don't accept insurance, by the way, too, because I don't want to play by their rules. And I'm already thinking things down the road. I that's part of why I started my podcast too.
Yeah.
Is, well, what if I lose my license? I can do some consulting or coaching or whatever through the podcast. I'm thinking ahead. Don't just think about how do I keep my job. Think 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, because guess what? That's your kids.
Yeah.
You have to build something better for your kids.
Yeah.
So don't just look at your current job, your current situation. That's so shallow and short-term focused. You got to look through the bigger picture, and you being honest now and being bold now, who knows what can open up down the road. But if we're quiet, it's never going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Well, let me ask you this. You just talked about taking action, doing something, not only saying what you believe in, entering into the conversation, but also doing things. If you were to encourage the audience now with one or two things that you would say, hey, here's a way to engage in this, and here's something you can do to enter into this conversation and be authentically you, and also kind of push back against the culture war, what would you tell them to do?
Yeah. The first thing I would say is find the thing that you are just super passionate about and that you know what you're talking about. For me, we already mentioned about gender affirming care. That was one where, honestly, I don't need to look at the research all that much.
Yeah.
I know what a boy and a girl is. It's a pretty easy thing for me. And I know in my practice, I will lose my career. I'm not doing that. That's an easy one for me to do. So I'm sticking with that one.
Yeah.
It's vitally important that while yes, we want to be courageous, that you have a little bit of tact and wisdom of what you're doing. Don't jump into a topic that you think you're right about, but you have no idea what you're talking about. Pick things that you're passionate about and that you know what you're talking about. That's really important. We start there, because you start spouting off stuff about economic things or whatever that you don't know what you're talking about, you're going to get eaten alive. And that's not going to be good for anybody. So pick something you're passionate about. And then from there, start small and say something. Maybe you start with your spouse. Maybe you haven't talked to your spouse about whatever the issue is. Man, this homework assignment they sent with our kids, I don't know about that, huh? What do you think about it? Start there. Then maybe you talk to the teacher. Then maybe you go to the school board. Maybe you write on Facebook. But start at that lowest common denominator. Maybe that's your spouse. Maybe that's your kid, and work your way up. Don't make plans to go speak to the UN at first. You're not going to go there. Start small, start local, and then broaden your way out.
I love that. And I think starting with your passion is important, right? We always talk about spheres of influence. There's certain aspects of your life that you can control, and then there are aspects of your life that you can influence. And so you have to pick those spots that you're most passionate about, so that, because it's already part of your life, right? So if you're a mom or a dad and you're seeing what's happening at your school, maybe that's one of those passion points that you can get involved in and bring your values to the public square and make changes. Because I think then you can start to make a positive difference with other people in your classes, with other people in your neighborhoods, and then you really truly will make a difference.
Yes, absolutely. And that's something that I think COVID as much as I hate what happened to COVID, there's a lot of it that I'm actually really grateful for. And one thing that it is it shows how important local politics and just local things in general are. they're massive. And yeah, going to your school board, talking to your kids, those little things, like, oh, what difference is that going to make? It can make a huge difference. So
Yeah.
don't neglect those small things like that.
Yeah, I love that. Well, thanks for being such a great example, because I do think it takes a tremendous amount of courage to bring your values, to bring your faith to your workplace, to what you do professionally. It also is a tremendous amount of courage to bring your faith and values to your conversations with your neighbors, with your coworkers. I mean, all of this takes courage today because of the assault on our values. So thanks for, encouraging our audience to speak boldly, to enter into the conversation and really make a difference.
Absolutely, and that's what I love about this, is hearing other people's stories, having people reach out, and like I said, us make contact with, getting in connection with a different counselor. The stories and connections I've formed since being open are wonderful, and that's on the other side for you as the listener too. You have those opportunities as well.
Yeah, John, you've been a great guest, and we're going to share all of your contact information so that people can get a hold of you, especially as it comes to needing counseling for sure. And really appreciate you sharing what you've done. I think it's going to be a big boost for our audience to engage in the conversation, to stop self-censoring, and to make a difference. Thanks, my friend.
It's a pleasure being on.